A grim milestone for the Windy City, with the Chicago Tribune reporting this week that more than 3,000 people have been shot since the beginning of the year. That's an average of one shooting victim every 2 hours in the city, where 8 people were killed and 35 wounded last weekend alone. My next guest says Chicago is the country's most glaring example of the Ferguson effect. Heather McDonald is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and author of the book, The War on Cops, How the New Attack on Law and Order Makes Everyone Less Safe. So welcome back, Heather.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, so what is going on in Chicago that is behind this surge in violence?
The police are backing off, and criminals have become emboldened. Chicago demonstrates what happens when cops, under this false narrative that they're racist for trying to maintain order in high-crime areas, decide not to engage in what President Obama calls racist policing. They're driving by people on known drug corners who are hitching up their waistband at 1 a.m. like they have a gun, and not getting out of their cars, because when they do get out of their cars, they're routinely surrounded now by hostile, jeering crowds, cursing at them, sometimes throwing things at them. And besides that street-level animosity, they're operating under this pervasive narrative that has been promulgated by President Obama, echoed by the media, and of course put out there constantly by the Black Lives Matter activists, that the police are engaged in some homicidal shooting spree against blacks, all of which is patently, grotesquely false, Paul.
All right, you've been spending time in Chicago with police. You've talked to Dean Angelo, who's head of the police union. You wrote a piece for us this week. What else, other than sort of driving by people on corners, what else are the police not doing? Are they just sort of backing away from any kind of policing in these high-crime neighborhoods?
Oh, certainly not. The police are answering 911 calls after there's been a victim with alacrity.
Okay.
They're trying to solve murders. They're trying to solve homicides. Of course, with the no-snitch ethic, people are not cooperating with them. But what they're not doing, Paul, is that vast area of purely discretionary policing, of public order enforcement, what's known informally as clearing the corners. If there's large groups of teens hanging out, loitering, the public, the law-abiding residents want the police to intervene, but the activists and President Obama say that that's racist to do so, and so they're letting those crowds hang out, and it's out of those crowds often that drive-by shootings emerge. Okay,
so they're not doing the kind of broken windows, preemptive kind of policing and patrolling that has worked so well, for example, in cities like New York. But here's the question that puzzles me. If this violence is going on in these neighborhoods as it is, and now we've had these headlines about Chicago for a couple of years, okay, why isn't there a local outcry in these neighborhoods and elsewhere in the city that says, we've got to do something here? I know it's not the north side and the affluent neighborhoods where this is happening, but look, I mean, this violence is getting headlines all across the country. Why not a grassroots uprising against it?
There is, up to a point. You know, there's calls to bring in the National Guard. In 2012, when they had a similar outbreak, there was calls to reinstitute a more aggressive stop, question, and frisk regimen and bring in an anti-gang unit. But the fact of the matter is that the activists control the public discourse there, and they believe one of their demands is to disband the Chicago Police Department entirely. And in a sense, we're sort of getting that informally. Now, again, the cops are working their hearts out on behalf of victims after the fact, but they're not engaged in what you call, rightly, the preemptive, proactive policing.
All right, so what role is Rahm Emanuel playing? I can't imagine that this kind of, these kinds of statistics are helpful to him as a politician. What is he not saying anything? Is he saying it's somebody else's fault? What's he doing?
He's caught, and he's changed his tune. Last October, he met with Attorney General Loretta Lynch in Washington and himself acknowledged the depolicing effect, what I've called the Ferguson effect. He said cops had gone fetal. He noticed this. He said they're not interdicting criminal behavior. But then there was the final belated release of video of a very bad police shooting. And the political discourse has gotten even more anti-cop in Chicago, so he does not dare at this point stand up for proactive policing, and all he can do is complain about gun statutes and gun sentencing not being severe enough. That may be true. Of course, it's the Black Caucus that refuses to allow more extended sentences for repeat gun felons. But that's, in fact, not the problem, because the gun sentencing regime has not changed since 2014. What has changed is officers' willingness to engage in proactive policing. But at this point, Emanuel doesn't dare say it's time for the cops to go back being proactive.
All right, Heather McDonald, thanks very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.